Thank you all so much. I've given many speeches and been honored by more recognitions than I deserve, but none has meant more to me than the opportunity to speak to you on this beautiful, if hot, morning and be recognized so generously by my alma mater, DePauw University. Part of what makes this occasion so important to me are the people sharing the stage, our inspiring honorary degree recipients, Sarah Lennox and David Goodman, my friends Tim and Sharon Ubben, Sarah Wallace, and Brian Casey, people who have inspired me in many ways, but most of all by their love for and generosity towards this university, which is another way of saying their love and generosity for you. I count them among my dearest friends, so if you wake up tomorrow morning feeling desperately homesick for DePauw, as I did the morning after graduation, take comfort in this. I didn't know any of them when I graduated, and yet DePauw brought us together, and they continue to enrich my life. DePauw has remained a part of me, and I DePauw, as I hope it will for you. To the class of 2012, this is your day, and I'm honored that you've made me a part of it. In now distant 1973, I sat on this same lawn listening to another DePauw alumnus, Vernon Jordan. And if you've ever heard Vernon Jordan, you'll never forget it. Behind him stretch speakers that now span 175 years, each generation reaching out to touch the next. It is a humbling place to stand in this great tradition. Since I've been there, I know what you have accomplished and what it has taken to get here. Today, I salute you for your achievement. I salute your parents and families and friends for their contributions to your success. It is the time to celebrate and to savor this moment. It is also a time to banish that most annoying of questions, what are you doing after you graduate? Because after you graduate will be in about 45 minutes. Okay, let's face it, that question is not going away. After hearing the beautiful, moving, and inspiring words at yesterday's baccalaureate and now Nick's fantastic welcoming address, I thought perhaps I should just thank you and sit down. What can I add? I decided to compromise about 5 minutes ago. The title of my address is Defining Moments, and I want to tell you that right now those defining moments went from 5 to 3. But if you want the full address, you can read it on the website. Defining moments is the title of my speech, and you may wonder, what are they? They are relatively few. You will never forget them. Today's graduation is probably not one of them. They aren't great ceremonial occasions. They're not weddings, anniversaries, or even in my case, winning the Pulitzer Prize. They may well be known only to you. Some come suddenly and unexpectedly, others may be years in the making. Looking back on my life, I see now that they were clustered relatively early, but they have continued, and I don't know how many more lie ahead. A defining moment thrusts a decision upon you, one that will alter the course of your life. It will define who you are, what you achieve, how you feel about yourself, and how you will be remembered. Everything you have done so far, everything you have experienced at DePauw, has been preparing you for these moments. Indeed, choosing to attend DePauw may well be one of them, as it was for me. If you had known me as the awkward, thin, shy, and naive 17-year-old who arrived on this campus from Quincy, Illinois in 1969, you would no doubt think so. I had an easy answer to the after-graduation from DePauw question, Harvard Law School, which nonetheless begged the question, did I really want to be a lawyer? Thanks to my DePauw training, I did well, and I got a job at the New York firm of Cravath, Swaine & Moore, generally conceded then and now to be among the most prestigious firms in the country. How could I say no? I settled into a heady new existence of client-paid dinners and limos, first-class air travel, and long hours at the office. Like many elite firms, Cravath at the time was a fiercely competitive place. It hired 20 to 25 graduates each year, and it winnowed those down to maybe 1 or 2 7 years later. No one used the word fired, but everyone, quote unquote, passed over, which was the euphemism, had to find another job. I'm an avid amateur musician and played the piano as a hobby then and now, and one day I was on the subway at about 6 p.m. looking at some chamber music on my way to a weekly rehearsal. A young partner boarded the same car, spotted me looking at music, and asked me what I was doing. Cravath encouraged civic and pro bono activities, or so it said, and my chamber group played at old age homes and nursing homes. What could be wrong with that? I had gotten glowing performance reviews, but that year the senior partner reported to me that he was concerned that I was experiencing what he called distractions. He assured me that all life's joys and rewards could be found solely in the practice of law. He compared it to his time in Army boot camp. As long as he stayed at camp, he said he was very happy. It was only when he returned to the, quote, distractions, unquote, of big city Manhattan that he felt discontent. I knew he was referring to my chamber music. The young partner had reported our encounter. He, I later learned, was en route to his twice-weekly therapy session. But never mind. I gave up the chamber music, I pondered the partner's message, and it reinforced something I'd already observed. Those who survived to become partners, those who excelled, were not necessarily the smartest. They didn't necessarily go to the best schools. They weren't the most ambitious or even the hardest working. They shared something else. They loved their work. Improbable as it seemed to me, they loved the intellectual challenge of a knotty tax problem or getting a giant corporation out of a monopolization charge. I realized it was impossible to compete over a sustained period with people for whom work was the same as pleasure. And with that came a liberating corollary. If you're going to succeed, you'd better do something you love. So what might that be? The happiest I'd ever been was working as editor of the DePauw. I thought it was an extracurricular activity, not a job. But in New York, I met writers who actually made a living. I liked them. They were stimulating and interesting, and they stayed up late, and they told great stories. I'd always loved to read. In writing, could I possibly replicate that experience for others? Could I move people the way I had been moved? Could I change lives as mine had been changed? The idea gave me intense satisfaction. So I was offered a job at a new startup magazine, The American Lawyer. In 1979, it was about as easy to start a magazine as it is today to start a website. Of course, the mortality rate of such ventures was about 95%. A defining moment was upon me. Leaving a secure, prestigious, and highly paid job at a top law firm seemed like madness. No rational analysis would support a decision by someone like me with no professional journalism experience or training to join a startup magazine for less than half my cravat salary. So that's what I did. The simple answer is I felt compelled to do it. I did not want to look back on my life and regret missing such an opportunity. Since then, I've had the immense good fortune to love my work. Not every moment, of course, but most of the time, and deeply and passionately. It's just as well that work has almost always been a pleasure because there's been a lot of it. I've worked hard and I had to work hard. It is an intensely competitive world and not just at the cravats. At times it has been exhausting and stressful, and it has been deeply, richly satisfying beyond anything I'd ever hoped for. Now I'm going to tell you a story that I've shared with only a few close friends, and never before publicly. It is not an easy story for me to tell, but it is an important one. Maybe the most important defining moment of my life. My father was beloved by everyone who knew him. He was a man of passion and conviction and great zest for life. He left what seemed a secure job with International Harvester to work in the fledgling and risky world of broadcast television. He loved his work, and I idolized him and hoped to earn his respect and approval. But in one important respect, we were estranged. It may seem odd to you that for someone who has dedicated his career to finding the truth, I was very slow to reveal that truth about myself to him. I feared his disapproval, even rejection, and I'm not sure that's something I could have endured at an early age. Psychologists tell us that all children deserve the unconditional love of their parents. Few of us actually experience it, and we spend the rest of our lives seeking it. I desperately wanted to believe that my father loved me, so I said nothing. We lived in an extended state of don't ask, don't tell, which was not only stressful, but eventually came to seem to me fundamentally dishonest and unloving. And so I took a deep breath and told him and my mother that I'm gay. My mother cried. My father said he loved me. And then he said he could never condone what he considered an immoral lifestyle. No partner of mine would ever be welcome in his home. We argued about this many times, but his position only hardened. He was a man of deep principle and conviction, and I'd never known him to admit error or change his mind about something so fundamental. Despite his words of reassurance that he loved me, this did not feel like love. Some years later, I met Benjamin Weil, who worked in public health and had just returned from years fighting the AIDS epidemic in Africa. After being together 2 years, we invited our friends and family to a commitment ceremony in the garden of our farmhouse in upstate New York. We mailed an invitation to my parents. They never responded. A Presbyterian minister presided. The non-denominational ceremony was blessed by his congregation. A string quartet played. Everyone cried. And we had a dinner and dancing under a big tent. My father later told me that receiving that invitation felt like being kicked in the stomach. My parents' absence was a cloud over that otherwise perfect day, and a chorus of my friends urged me to cut my father off, to not condone his intolerance any more than he would condone what he considered my immorality, if for no other reason than to protect myself from further hurt and disappointment. Another defining moment was upon me. I gave this strategy considerable thought. I was angry. At times, I thought he deserved to be punished. But I couldn't get past a simple question. If I hoped for unconditional love from my father, then didn't I owe him unconditional love? And not in return for anything, because wouldn't that be conditional? My thoughts took me back to Professor Eigenbrod's incredible course at DePauw's in the New Testament. Did Jesus ask for unconditional love, or did he give it? And so I tried. I put aside my anger, and I did my best to love my father as I hoped he might love me. We stopped arguing. We spent many joyous times together, and as he gradually lost his eyesight and then his heart deteriorated, I was at his side. Eventually, he moved into a nursing home and hospice care. I figured he had days to live. One evening, I arrived for a visit, and we were alone in his room. He said he'd been looking back on his life, and he realized he had made a terrible mistake. I should have attended your ceremony, he said. I was proud and stubborn, and I was part of a different generation. But I don't have any excuses. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. By now, he was crying, and I was crying, and I said that I had forgiven him many years ago. That night, I experienced what unconditional love feels like. When I came into his room the next morning, he asked me if I had my cell phone with me. He asked me to get Benjamin on the phone, and then he took it away from me. I want you to know that I couldn't love you anymore if you were my own son, he told him. And even though his body was failing and he was in a nursing home, I've never seen my father happier than he was during those last days. One of the pleasures of getting older is that at some point the defining moments stop happening to you and you start helping them happen to other people. I met Brian Casey at a glamorous party in a Manhattan penthouse where everyone seemed richer, thinner, and better looking than me, except maybe Brian Casey. I expected to duck in, grab a drink, and make a quick exit. 2 hours later, I was still there, ignoring the other guests, while I talked to Brian Casey. We talked about colleges and books and law firms, and then colleges and colleges and colleges. He was working at Brown. He read my books and New Yorker articles. I thought to myself, he's going to be one hell of a college president. We exchanged emails, and then despite good intentions, the paper trail petered out. Several years passed, and when DePauw launched a search for a new president, I, of course, thought of Dr. Casey. It seemed a long shot. But one thing I've learned from Tim Ubben is think big. I found out Dr. Casey was now at Harvard, and I tried calling him. When that failed, I sent him an email. It took a few weeks, but finally he called me at home. We talked for another 2 hours. He didn't rule it out. I jumped on a plane, and I flew to Boston. I stood outside in Harvard Yard until 10 o'clock at night when he finally came out of his office. It was a crisp October evening, and I waylaid him. We walked around Harvard Square. I'd been to Harvard, and let me tell you, there are many good things to say about Harvard, but warmth is not at the top of the list. Yet everyone in Harvard Square seemed to know Dr. Casey, and he knew them. We talked for more hours, but I finally said there was only so much I could say about DePauw. There's only so you can learn from statistics. You have to meet the faculty. You have to meet the students. You have to meet the alumni. They're special. You'll know what I mean. The next morning, I called Sarah Wallace. I had set something in motion, but now it was time for me to step aside. Sarah chose the search committee and did the lion's share of the work. Tim Ubben was a critical member of the committee. No one would have been hired without his support. Betsy Demings organized the process, as she does all else, and made Dr. Casey feel welcome. Dave Hoover, the chairman of the board, had to deliver the committee's final decision to Brian. And that was Brian Casey's defining moment. Now, that's not a story for me to tell. All I can say today, my original email is framed and hangs on his office. Beyond that, I thought Dr. Casey would be a hell of a president someday. I thought he'd be a great president for DePauw. I had no idea he turned into the best college president in America. And now it is your turn. You are heading into the world. Your defining moments are at hand. They will likely come sooner than you expect. Let me assure you, each and every one of you, you are ready. Your hearts and minds have been trained for exactly this purpose. Embrace these moments with all the courage, confidence, optimism, intelligence, wisdom, and most of all, love that lie within you. The world will be a better place, and your rewards for doing so will be immeasurable as you create lives that are singularly, irrevocably, irascibly, and splendidly yours.